I have an announcement on behalf of the late Mr. Edmund Ashworth. As of this morning, the new owner of Ashworth Memorial Hospital is Florence Ashworth.
Daughter of the late Mr. Ashworth. Florence, you're his daughter? I've always been his daughter. I just wasn't the daughter who mattered to anyone here. Until today.
Are you sure about this, Florence?
It is a new day.
Ashworth Memorial was the kind of hospital that photographed well. Marble reception floors, a donor wall with gold lettering, consultants who drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. And somewhere inside all of that polish was a nurse named Florence, quietly excellent at her job and quietly invisible to almost everyone around her. She wasn't unfriendly. She wasn't awkward. She simply didn't perform the way some people expect junior staff to perform. The eagerness, the small talk, the visible hunger to be noticed. She did her job well and went home. And in a workplace built on hierarchy, that kind of quiet confidence gets misread. People assumed she had nothing going on beneath the surface, so they filled in the blanks themselves. Two of her colleagues, Cordelia and Margot, filled those blanks with condescension. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting matches, no confrontations. Just the low hum of everyday unkindness that's easy to overlook unless you're the one absorbing it. A comment about her lunch, a joke that wasn't really a joke, a tone reserved specifically for her, different from the one used with anyone else in the room. Her manager, a formidable woman named Mrs. Whitlock, ran a tight ward and had little patience for anyone she'd already decided wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't cruel in any way you could report to HR, just dismissive, in the particular way senior staff sometimes are with people they've quietly written off. "Some people are lifers," she told a new recruit once, nodding toward Florence's station. "Not a bad thing, just know your ceiling." Florence heard variations of that sentiment for over a decade. And here's what's worth sitting with for a second. She never once corrected anyone. Not because she didn't notice, she noticed everything, but because she'd made peace, a long time ago, with being underestimated. Her mother had raised her on one particular idea, that the people who talk the most about your limitations are usually the ones with the least insight into who you actually are. It's worth being specific about what that underestimation actually looked like, day to day, because the small details matter more than the big ones. It was Florence who got asked to cover the least desirable shifts, with the least discussion about whether it suited her. It was Florence whose ideas in team meetings tended to get repeated back by someone else minutes later, credited to whoever said them the second time. It was Florence who trained 2 junior doctors who were, within 18 months, earning more than she was, without anyone in the building finding that particularly strange. None of it was illegal. None of it would have shown up on any HR complaint. It was just the accumulated weight of 100 small decisions, made by people who'd quietly decided, somewhere along the way, that Florence simply wasn't someone worth reconsidering. She noticed all of it, by the way. That's an important detail. This wasn't a woman who drifted through her own mistreatment unaware. She clocked every slight, filed it away, and chose deliberately not to let it change how she showed up the next day. That's a different kind of resilience than the version we usually see dramatized, less about gritted teeth and more about quiet, repeated choice. What none of them knew, what Florence herself only partly understood, was that this hospital, this exact building, had been built from nothing by her father. Edmund Ashworth was not the kind of man who ended up on magazine covers. He died quietly in his sleep, on an unremarkable Tuesday. A few weeks after the funeral, Margaret sat across from the family solicitor with her 2 sons beside her, entirely at ease. There was no reason, in her mind, for this meeting to be anything other than a formality. "I assume we're simply finalizing things," she said. "Everything passes to Edward and Frederick, as it always would have." The solicitor, a measured man named Mr. Pembridge, opened a sealed envelope that had clearly been prepared with some care. Mr. Ashworth left specific instructions, he said. The estate, including Ashworth Memorial Hospital, passes to his daughter. It's worth pausing here, because this is the moment most people picture when they imagine this kind of story. The outrage, the disbelief, the "there is no daughter" response that Edward gave almost immediately. The woman who would inherit everything had spent over a decade being quietly underestimated by an institution that, as it turned out, was already hers. Frederick, who'd said almost nothing during the meeting, asked the one question that actually mattered. Why had their father waited until his death to make any of this known? Margaret left that meeting having said very little else. What struck the solicitor most, he later admitted, wasn't her anger. It was how quickly the anger gave way to something closer to bewilderment. 4 decades of marriage, and she was only now learning there had been an entire chapter of her husband's life she'd never once suspected. A week later, Florence arrived at the hospital with Mr. Pembridge beside her, dressed exactly as she always was. No entourage, no announcement of her own making. Just the same woman who'd walked those corridors 1,000 times before, now walking them for a very different reason. Mr. Pembridge gathered the staff and made the announcement plainly, without theatrics. As of that morning, Florence Ashworth, daughter of the late Edmund Ashworth, was the new owner of Ashworth Memorial Hospital. Mrs. Whitlock, to her credit, didn't try to hide her reaction. "You're his daughter?" she asked, visibly rattled. "I've always been his daughter," Florence said. "I simply wasn't the daughter who mattered to anyone here, until today." There's a version of this story where Florence uses that moment to settle scores. Nobody would have blamed her. 11 years is a long time to hold your tongue. For 11 years, people had built an entire understanding of who Florence was, her prospects, her ambitions, her place in the pecking order, based on almost nothing beyond a few surface impressions. In the space of one announcement, all of that understanding turned out to be not just wrong, but built on assumptions nobody had ever bothered to check. That's an uncomfortable thing to realize about yourself in front of colleagues. She laid out 3 changes, plainly and without theatrics. Every member of staff would be treated with equal dignity, regardless of title, because nobody in that building actually knew who they were standing next to. Mockery and casual humiliation of co-workers would be written formally into the code of conduct, with real consequences attached. And every quarter, an anonymous welfare review would give staff a way to flag problems before they calcified into 11 years of silence, the way hers had. "I'm not punishing anyone today," she told the room. "I'm giving all of you the chance to do better than what was done to me. That's the only inheritance I actually want to leave behind here." It's a small line, but it's the thesis of the entire story, if you think about it. She didn't inherit a hospital and decide to make it about herself. She inherited a culture and decided to fix it. What's easy to miss, watching from the outside, is how much restraint that actually took. Over the following months, the hospital's culture shifted in small, mostly unremarkable ways. Staff who used to gossip in the break room started actually greeting each other properly. Cordelia, somewhat surprisingly, became one of the more vocal supporters of the new welfare reviews, using hers more than once to reflect honestly on how she'd treated people she'd once considered beneath her notice. Florence never brought it up publicly. She simply noticed and let it stand. Margaret never fully reconciled with what had happened, not in any tidy or complete way, but she did eventually send a short letter acknowledging that Edmund's decision, whatever she thought of it, had clearly been deliberate. It wasn't an apology. It was, perhaps, as close as someone like Margaret was ever going to get to one. Edward unexpectedly became a semi-regular presence at the hospital, not to check up on his half-sister, but because he found himself genuinely curious about a sibling he'd never known existed. What developed between them wasn't some instant sentimental bond. It was slower and more believable than that. Two people cautiously getting to know each other without the shared history most siblings take for granted. A year after that first announcement, the hospital held its annual staff dinner. Traditionally a stiff affair reserved for senior staff, now opened up to everyone, from consultants to the newest member of the cleaning team. Florence didn't give a speech about growth or reputation. She simply thanked people for the kind of work that rarely gets acknowledged until something goes wrong. It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't need to be. She kept her old staff locker too, the one with her name still faintly scratched into the metal from over a decade of use. Not out of sentimentality exactly, more as a kind of quiet anchor. A reminder that the woman signing off on hospital budgets now was the same woman who used to be told, without much ceremony, that she'd reached her ceiling. She still worked the occasional shift on the ward, mostly on short-staffed weekends, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she genuinely preferred being useful to being ornamental. New staff, hired well after the transition, sometimes had no idea their employer occasionally covered a night shift alongside them until someone eventually mentioned it in passing. Cordelia and Margot both stayed on as well, and their working relationship with Florence settled over time into something neither warm nor hostile. Professional, respectful, occasionally even easy. Neither of them ever fully addressed what they'd said to her over the years, not directly. But the way they conducted themselves afterward suggested they understood in their own way exactly what they'd been given a second chance to correct. Edward, for his part, eventually joined the hospital's board in an advisory capacity, not out of any grand reconciliation, but because Florence had asked him plainly whether he wanted to be part of something rather than simply adjacent to it. He said yes. It surprised him more than anyone.
Thank you for watching the video. Please click on the subscribe button. Also, like and comment below, and don't forget to share. See you in the next video.